Yeah, thanks for coming out. My name's Carol Spring. I'm with Extinction Rebellion DC. We're really excited to be here, partnering with Sustainable Dream Fest. And I'm going to give a little talk today. This talk is being given all over the world. It's been given many times all over the world. The full name is Heading for Extinction and What You Can Do About It. And we're excited to be here. I'm going to start just by introducing myself a little bit. I'm a mom of a teenager in DC, and my daughter started getting involved with Extinction Rebellion about a year and a half ago, and she started pulling me along to actions, and I went to a few actions. I started getting to know people, and I started learning more about the movement, and I found this really wonderful community in XRDC, really great folks, and I found it's a place that cares about your thoughts and opinions and your passions, and it's a place where everyone's got the same goal. We all care, and then as I began taking more actions, I went to Minnesota to be in solidarity with indigenous water protectors, land defenders, who were fighting against a very destructive oil pipeline.
2016, right?
Last year, actually.
Last year, yeah.
Line 3 pipeline in Minnesota, yeah. It keeps happening.
This is Minnesota instead of South Dakota.
Right, yeah. And so now I feel more connected, and I feel a greater sense of urgency. Extinction Rebellion, we call ourselves XR, also for short. We are a nonviolent, direct action, civil disobedience movement. We're everyday people looking for solutions to the climate and ecological crisis. We've recognized that individual action is not enough. We must make our governments and corporations, home and internationally, take action. Our governments must serve and protect us. We're going to tell you the truth about the climate and ecological crisis, and we're going to use the latest science to show you how the situation is actually worse than what people usually think. Secondly, that governments and corporations know, but they intentionally lie to us. We are being told lies about the greatest challenge that the planet and the human race have ever faced. We will show, thirdly, that we have very little time. And then finally, that there is a solution and a way out. And this is through mass civil disobedience. When we talk about the climate crisis, you might feel some strong emotions as we go through this talk. You might feel a sense of grief about the extinction of species. You might feel anger at the inaction of governments. You might feel guilt. And we've all been there. Don't let it numb you or paralyze you. We're all in the same boat, and we're here to turn it into something constructive. Knowing that you can make a difference can bring you a sense of hope and even relief, and a feeling of empowerment. I know that I have found that to be true. I and many others who have joined XR often find it even therapeutic. We're a massive group working toward the same goals, and it is uplifting to be part of that. Power is at the heart of the world's most pressing problems. Power is concentrated in the hands of a tiny minority of humanity. Political leaders, global corporations, financial institutions, the super rich, they don't care about the damage they're doing to the earth. They perpetuate gross inequities. People of color are disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change, especially in the global south. And even in industrialized countries like ours, people of color are dying of COVID at higher rates. They're disproportionately affected by air pollution. They have lower life expectancy, less access to education, and, as we've all heard, suffer more police brutality. We stand with many other movements advocating for justice. Our focus today is on the earth. This beautiful planet is our life support system. Everything we need is here. The air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink. Our planet is a complex, interdependent system. You've probably seen some of the placards people might carry saying, "There is no planet B." Well, there isn't. This is it. If we destroy it, there's nowhere else to go. And we're causing it irreparable damage. We are in a climate crisis caused by burning of fossil fuels and the way we use land. We're in an ecological crisis caused by growth in consumption by the rich minority. The impacts are serious now and they're getting worse. The science is clear, and we're going to take a look at that in the next little bit. Governments and corporations are knowingly not doing enough to halt the crisis. Instead, they're spreading myths about net zero targets way, way out in the future, while they're continuing to subsidize fossil fuels and pay massive agricultural conglomerates to destroy the land. We're threatening the survival of a huge proportion of living creatures and plants, as well as ourselves. I'm going to start by talking about the climate crisis. So this chart shows how global average temperatures have been rising in tandem with atmospheric carbon dioxide. It shows atmospheric concentration of CO2 over the past 2,000 years, the red line, and then the average annual temperature from 1880 to 2019. That's the blue squiggly line. The graph is called a hockey stick graph because it looks like a hockey stick. Although there is variation from year to year, the overall CO2 trend is upward. Before the Industrial Revolution, CO2 pretty much stayed somewhere around 280 parts per million. After the Industrial Revolution, CO2 emissions and therefore concentrations in the atmosphere began to skyrocket. This rise in atmospheric concentration is mainly due to burning of fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and gas, sometimes called natural gas. Carbon dioxide concentrations are now over 414 parts per million and rising. That's the highest level seen in at least the last 3 million years. Each year brings new record levels, and the rate of increase is accelerating. Increased CO2 causes an accompanying temperature rise. We've already reached 1.2 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels, and currently heading for around 3 degrees or more by the end of the century. To halt global warming, we have to stop the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this diagram shows a metaphor for how carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere work. So we're looking at the carbon dioxide emissions each year is like the flow from the tap. The bathtub is our atmosphere. And this shows why reducing emissions isn't enough. The water already in the bath is the CO2 already in the atmosphere. And the running tap is the emissions we add to it each year. If we slow down the tap, it doesn't reduce the water in the bath. It increases water in the bath, just less quickly. In the lockdown year of 2020, we slowed the tap down by only about 6 or 7%, which means we still added 93% of 2019's carbon emissions. Net zero means stopping the bath water rising any further. Is it getting hotter just because of greenhouse gas emissions? No. We've also triggered climate-changing forces that feed on themselves. These are called feedback loops. So the first one I want to talk about as an example is the Albedo Effect. 100 years ago, Mainly ice and snow covered the Arctic and reflected much of the sunlight away from the surface. This is called high albedo. That is, the surface reflects much of the light that falls on it. But now the increasing air and water temperatures from climate change cause Arctic ice to melt. This exposes dark open water, rocks, and soil. These absorb sunlight instead of reflecting it. That's low albedo. This causes additional melting, which causes less reflection, and the cycle then continues. This is a major reason the Arctic is warming at 3 times the world average. Then the second example of a feedback loop is the melting permafrost. Permafrost is ground which has been frozen all the time for at least 2 years. The warming air and ocean water from climate change melt it. This releases large amounts of methane, a high-potency greenhouse gas. This causes the atmosphere to heat, which causes more permafrost to melt. The scientist in the blue coat has ignited methane released from melting permafrost. Scientists are also warning us that tipping points are coming. A tipping point is when a large and often irreversible change takes place in the climate system. Cross the tipping points, and there's no way back. For example, scientists believe that we're close to the irreversible tipping point of Arctic ice melting. This melting guarantees rising sea levels and catastrophic damage to island nations and most coastal cities. We will not be able to turn this around, no matter what we do, for hundreds or thousands of years. The climate science body of the United Nations is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. Government leaders look to it for information to guide their policy decisions. It recently published its most worrying report yet about the physical basis of the climate crisis. So I'm going to talk about temperatures in Fahrenheit, even though the chart here is in Celsius. The climate is not heating at the same rate around the world. The Arctic is heating, for example, at multiple times the global average. The map on the lower right is a model of a hypothetical average global temperature increase of about 7 degrees Fahrenheit. There's no assumption about when that might happen. That dark area descending from the Arctic into southern Canada, almost to the US, will experience a temperature average of 12.6 degrees Fahrenheit, way hotter than the global average. And it's coming for us. So that is the climate emergency, but climate is only part of the problem. There's also the ecological crisis. According to the Secretary General of the UN, humanity is waging a war on nature. Human activity is causing a mass extinction of animals. This extinction is caused by exploding human consumption, not natural events, and that's why it's better called an extermination. And the world has failed to meet a single target to stop the destruction of nature. The consequences of global warming and ecological destruction are dire, and they fit into 3 linked categories: climate, ecological, and human. Climate crisis is not something bad that might happen in the future. It's something bad that is happening right now. We are now at 1.2 degrees of heating, and around a third of the global population are already experiencing warming of more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. On current trend, and there's no reason to believe it'll be anything different, we are on track for nearly 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century, which would be disastrous for much of the world. Basically, things are a lot worse than we thought they were. People talk about climate disaster, but what does disastrous actually mean? It means extreme hot and dry conditions and extreme wet conditions. Future generations will have to live in a world that is so unstable that it will be very difficult for them to have any predictability about their life whatsoever. Global warming has contributed to droughts since at least 1900, and the influence will get stronger. At the same time, bigger and more devastating floods and hurricanes are already linked to climate change. Forest fires are increasing in number, duration, and size. Melting glaciers and ice sheets are causing sea level rise, and coastal extreme events are becoming more severe. The rate of sea level rise is accelerating and unprecedented. Worst case projections of a 2-meter rise by 2100 can't be ruled out. All of this keeps getting worse and worse unless we act. We critically depend on the Earth's natural systems, but the Earth has lost its capacity to sustain current and future human well-being. Biodiversity is declining. 1 million species are at risk of extinction. This is about 1,000 times the background extinction rate typical of the Earth's past before the Industrial Revolution. 1,000 times. As a result of our actions, we are living in further and further separation from nature. And if climate and ecological consequences weren't enough, there's the human impact. Imagine it's 2050 and the world is 2 degrees warmer. Things will change beyond recognition and in ways we can't even imagine. Life, the way we're accustomed to thinking about it, has ended. At this imaginary point in time, billions will be living in unbearable heat. Billions will be chronically short of water. Up to 1 billion people around the world will have had to abandon their homes to move somewhere safer, if they can find somewhere safer, where the people already living there are kind enough to accept them. That may be the biggest if in the history of mankind. Hundreds of millions will be living with constant flooding and the inundation of their homes and cities. Places like Miami, New York City, Tokyo, Dhaka, and Amsterdam might become uninhabitable. That isn't that far away. And more than 99% of the world's coral reefs will be dead, decimating wild fish stocks. Millions will starve to death because crops will have completely failed. So, just want to take a moment to just pause, throwing a lot of information at you, and just to reflect on what you've just heard, and after a moment, I'm going to ask, just you can throw out like a word about how you're feeling right now. How's this hitting you?
It's impactful. So we need to change.
Urgency.
Scared, urgency. Yeah. Rebellion. Enlightened.
Looking for answers.
Looking for answers.
Wondering how to convince people, other people.
How to convince other people.
The world.
Yeah. So hold on to those, whether you voiced it or not. Just hold yourself tenderly as we move through this. We're going to get to some solutions. In 2015 in Paris, the Paris Climate Agreement, all nations agreed that global warming was already causing wide-ranging and serious effects. World leaders agreed that further global warming was dangerous and warming beyond 2 degrees must be avoided. They committed to hold global warming well below 2 degrees and aim for no more than 1.5 degrees. Well, what happened? We're drowning in promises. The IPCC has been around for over 30 years providing advice. There have been conferences and agreements and lots of words. And in countries all over the world, there have been lots of inadequate legislation. There have been emission standards and carbon trading, and none of it has really made a big difference. Environmental campaign groups have tried to make those in power take this seriously. Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth have both been campaigning for over 50 years. The Sierra Club is over 100 years old. And there have been 1,000 legal actions against governments in 28 countries. But nothing's worked. Remember the hockey stick graph we saw earlier where we saw the CO2 emissions and temperatures skyrocketing? So here we have the same graph with some of the landmarks that were supposed to help stop. And now none of this has worked. Since the formation of the IPCC in 1988, we have emitted more CO2 knowingly than all of our emissions previously. When leaders tell you that they're making progress, just look at this graph. If the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere keeps going up, then we're failing, no matter how many things we're doing. You may have heard recent new pledges from Joe Biden about lowering emissions. While every reduction is welcome, we can't be fooled into thinking that they're going nearly far enough or fast enough to avoid disaster. So in this chart, we'll see 3 key bits of information. First, the 1.5 degree temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. Then, the range of temperature increases that the next round of pledges could bring us to. The central estimate is 2.4 degrees Celsius, which is well beyond the upper limit agreed to at Paris. So it's very clear that these promises are simply not good enough. World leaders are pledging catastrophe. But what's most important is the third set over here. This range shows the gulf between promises and actual policies to implement these promises. This result is terrifying because current policies take us to a central estimate of 2.9 degrees warming with a worst case of nearly 4 degrees Celsius. Even the low end of the range is well beyond the Paris Agreement. Beyond this, the world faces dangerous and irreversible damage. This is the trajectory we are still on. And it's not just something that happens way out in the future. We're about to smash through the 1.5 degree target that we set in Paris. The World Meteorological Organization says there's a 40% chance that we will hit that temperature within 3 years, 2025, with the devastating consequences that we've already talked about. Many scientists say we're no longer able to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees. But the difference between a 1.5 degree world and a 2 degree world is huge. There's still everything to fight for, because the more we delay action, the worse things get. So, in fact, governments are still investing more in fossil fuels than in clean energy. In a single year, between January 2020 and March 2021, the richest 7 nations in the world, the G7, committed more than $189 billion to support coal, oil, and gas, far more than clean forms of energy. If governments are serious about their climate commitments, they have to stop new investments in fossil fuels now. Despite its rhetoric, the U.S. government still spends more on supporting fossil fuels than renewable energy. In fact, it provided almost $6 trillion in subsidies to fossil fuel companies in 2020. $6 trillion. All of this spending on fossil fuels is simply incompatible with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. Because of the CO2 already dumped into the atmosphere, the world is in a climate emergency. Business as usual and incremental change will not halt or even slow global warming. Only rapid and transformational change to the way we use energy, land, and resources will do. To stand a reasonable chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, we must reach net zero CO2 emissions within 3 years. Only structural change is going to stop global warming. But we keep going in the wrong direction. Despite changes in rhetoric, nothing meaningful has changed. The world is still in climate denial, and the carbon dioxide curve keeps going up. And the scientific evidence is crystal clear. It has to come from the powerful. Lifestyle and other personal changes from individuals, even from large groups of people, totally misunderstands the scale of the challenge. Raise your hand if you know where the idea of the personal carbon footprint came from originally. A few people. So originally, a PR firm for BP, British Petroleum Oil Company, dreamed this up as a way to divert attention from what they were doing to destroy the earth. Oh, let's just push it off onto the consumers. Let's see if we can make people feel guilty about their own individual actions, and then it'll distract from the massive damage that we're doing, the oil spills, and everything. Well, the PR campaign worked. So now people think, okay, I just need to drive my car a little less and we'll be fine. Or maybe I just need to recycle a little more or something. But meanwhile, all these massive fossil fuel companies who could really make meaningful change are continuing to extract extraordinary amounts of oil and gas and profit. They're trying to distract you. Because although our own personal actions reducing harm to the environment and reducing our carbon footprint are right, they do model a world in which we want to live and thrive. To believe that they are enough is to fundamentally misunderstand the scale and the source of the catastrophe. Let's be totally clear. We will never tackle the climate crisis with individual action. And we will never tackle the ecological crisis with individual action. Most CO2 is emitted on our behalf, but totally outside our control. The major emission sources like electricity generation, airports, shipping, agriculture, and heavy industry are all outside our control.
And the military.
And the military. The Pentagon is the world's number one source of emissions.
1/4 of all U.S. emissions come from the Pentagon, the U.S. military.
Thank you. Yes. And then deforestation, exploitative fishing, peat bog and mangrove destruction, and the vast deserts of monoculture farming are likewise outside our control. The extraordinary habitat destruction for agricultural land to support soaring meat consumption, especially in the global north, is the predominant cause of ecocide and also out of our control. So this is why by far the biggest thing you can do to tackle the climate and ecological crises is political engagement. So, how did we get here? First, our electoral system. How far ahead in the future do our elected leaders think? Maybe next quarter, maybe a year or two? What do you think?
Now, it has to do with their next donor.
The next donor,
That
right.
is basically who's actually going to contribute to their reelection.
Yeah.
Because what they do is they have a shell game where they say, I stand on this platform, I have this belief, and they'll say anything in front of you. They may not intend that going in, but in order for them to be successful, they wind up being trained to be that way.
Yeah.
That's why having change of leadership is important.
Yeah, so they're not thinking 10 or 20 years out. They're not thinking
Next election.
anything. They're thinking about the next election. They're thinking about their donors. And that's the way the system works. Yeah, so the second problem is the constant demand for growth. Capitalism has helped to create this life that we live, that many of us enjoy in the global north, but it also assumes that the environment is an endless source of raw materials and an endless sink of waste and pollution. It assumes that these resources are free forever and that waste has no consequences forever. But we're now using 1 3/4 planets. So that means that we are using the Earth's resources much faster than they can be replaced. And we only have one planet. The third problem is that citizens' voices calling for action has been incapable of forcing change. It's been drowned out by the money and influence, like this gentleman was talking about, the big donors, the super rich, the corporations that are contributing so much to these campaigns, all these vested interests. Global climate justice has been sacrificed for the sake of a tiny minority. The top 5 oil producers alone are spending $200 million a year just on lobbying to delay carbon reduction. And it's not just the oil companies. Lending to fossil fuel companies from banks is on the rise. Over $700 billion per year in lending to fossil fuel companies from banks, because bankers have the ear of government too. So we have a small window of time to bring about real action before it's too late. And if we do nothing else, we need to stop fossil fuels from being extracted and used. We need to do this rapidly, entirely, and forever. Everything else is secondary, because if we don't do that, then we will fail. It's that straightforward. And personal action and lifestyle changes on their own will fail. We have to convince the powerful to change. And that's exactly what XR is here to do. And let's be clear, this can be done. Net zero is possible. Citizens around the world are crying out for action. 2/3 of us, despite all the misinformation, 2/3 of us believe that climate change is a global emergency. But the will to make change only exists on paper. The powerful need to decide to leave fossil fuels in the ground, stop investing in harm, go far further and faster in greening our economy, and halt ecocide. There has to be legislation, there has to be communication of the truth, there has to be incentives for dramatic change, and we have to stop financial institutions investing in destruction. And we need urgency, which we aren't seeing. We're not protesting because we think it's like loads of fun, you know? We'd rather just, sit back and enjoy our lives like everyone else. But there's nothing we've seen so far that tells us we can safely go home. If everyone fully understood the urgency, Congresses and parliaments around the world would be packed full of parents terrified for their children's futures. And daily newspaper front pages would carry climate emergency headlines daily like they do for COVID. So that's what we want to see. So just this little quote from Nelson Mandela. He said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." We're here to say it's possible. We can do it. But we need your help. We are Extinction Rebellion. We've been called the fastest growing startup in history. We have a plan. We know there are no guarantees. We are not certain that we'll succeed, but we have to try. We feel compelled because of the urgency of the situation. All other avenues have been exhausted. We all know we're driving toward the cliff edge. We understand what's going on. We know that there is a moral imperative. So we invite you to step out of your comfort zone. Do things you've never done before. We're all doing it. Traditional political engagement doesn't go far enough when the system is failing so obviously and so catastrophically. Rebelling is the only solution. Because we've seen that everything we've tried so far has failed, and you've heard the reasons why. Campaign groups in the past have had the right aims, but they just haven't succeeded. So we urgently need a new approach. So that's why we're here, to build a mass movement with a strategy that can succeed. So you might be wondering how we think Extinction Rebellion might succeed where all these other efforts have failed. So before we get on to XR, let's look at the ingredients of a successful nonviolent civil disobedience movement. XR draws on a long tradition of campaigns which have chosen nonviolent civil disobedience to address injustice, like the suffragettes in the picture, like Mahatma Gandhi and Rosa Parks. So we believe nonviolence is at the core of this movement, because we believe that you cannot end destruction with destruction. We are driven by our love for life and living things. We also know that it's strategic. Nonviolence works. And size is also crucial. We want to bring everybody in. We want to help build a mass movement. And nonviolent direct action creates disruption. It creates dilemmas. There's strategic ways that put pressure on people in power. The protest needs to be focused where the power is. Here in Washington, D.C., for example, there's a lot of powerful interests here. We can have a lot of power because of where we live. And people all over the world would love to be here working with us. You know, just last week, some activists in Argentina reached out to us and said, hey, we need your help because we're struggling with this massive debt to the International Monetary Fund, and we need your help to speak to the IMF. Their headquarters are right in DC. Can you help us out? So we marched to the IMF along with folks in 20 other countries. And we asked the IMF to cancel the debt in Argentina and other places in the global south. And it's a global movement that we're part of. So we know that change doesn't happen overnight. So we're also building resilience because we know we've got to sustain this until we succeed. We're following in the footsteps and learning from movements that have come before us. From India's independence movement to women's suffrage, the abolition movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-apartheid movement, the LGBTQ movement. Every single one has met with sustained resistance. So we know what we're facing. And just like those movements, we seek the tipping point where positive change not only becomes possible, it becomes inevitable. This is a different kind of tipping point than we were looking at earlier. This is the tipping point of change, of positive change. How do we make the powerful change? And we know that our strategy works. In the UK, where Extinction Rebellion began, originally a quarter of the people in UK said that, a few years ago, said that they knew that we were facing a climate emergency. Now 81% of people in the UK say that we're facing a climate emergency. So we know that it works, and we're working with activists all over the world. We have 4 demands. The first one is to tell the truth. The media, the government, and everyone, we must be clear about the climate and ecological crisis. Media tries to do a, take both sides kind of approach to climate change, or they're too influenced by their advertisers, the wealthy, or their owners, the Jeff Bezos and others. And for too long, our government has neglected to be honest about the seriousness of the problem. The second demand is to act now. We must halt biodiversity loss and stop emitting greenhouse gases by 2025. Can we do that in 3 years? Yes! That choice of years is for 2 reasons. First, it's because we actually have to do it. That's what the IPCC report says. The greenhouse gas emissions must peak in the next 3 years or we're totally screwed. Secondly, if we talk about 2050 or even 2035, it still feels far away. 2025 makes clear the nature of the emergency that we face and the urgency. Our third demand is to convene citizens' assemblies. Raise your hand if you know what a citizens' assembly is. Reb, do you want to share with us what a citizens' assembly is?
It's where a group of citizens representative of the whole population get the opinion of the majority of population and come to consensus to get the government to act on what the citizens want.
That's right. So a real democracy, right? Thank you, Reb. And it can be a really powerful way that ordinary citizens can really have a say in what's going on in the government. And people in disadvantaged communities can start really having a say. And then finally, the fourth demand is for a just transition. This demand was added to the original 3 here in the US. We have to prioritize the safety, the well-being, and the needs of the most vulnerable people and communities, and they must lead the way. We believe that we must establish reparations and remediation led by and for Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, and poor communities for years of environmental injustice. We must establish legal rights for ecosystems and repair the ongoing ecocide in order to maintain a livable and just planet for all. And would love to talk with you more about this. There's a lot more detail, but just wanted to give you the overview here.
There's a question over there.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to bring up something. If you go online and you look at the truckers' protest in Ottawa, whether you believe their position or not, they're actually effectively bringing in a lot of the techniques that you're using in order to get the attention of the government, like shutting down the roads, in order to, and getting Justin Trudeau to try to admit that maybe he's gaslighting everybody. So I just want to mention that if you want to do something that's happening right now, that's a good example.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll stop there.
Thank you, yeah. Yeah, the disruption can be extremely effective.
Because that's what you're doing with the Extinction Rebellion. I know, I've heard what you've done before in the last 3 years.
Yeah, thank you, yeah. Yeah, disruption can be extremely effective. Our values and our principles, I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's really a place where we're trying to create a regenerative culture, a new way of being together in community where we respect each other, hold each other up, and kind of create the kind of world that we want to live in. And we are nonviolent. This is our most essential principle. And does anyone know what the COP25 was? Big climate change conference. XR was the #1 influencer at COP25, and we are winning the argument. Our movement has grown rapidly, and new groups are popping up all the time. But the hockey stick remains the reality. There's still a huge amount to do. We need you. So, I just want to say, don't come here and thank us for doing what we do. Don't thank me for giving this talk, but join us. There is room for you in this movement. Whatever it is you enjoy doing, you don't have to give talks. You don't have to block traffic, although if you do, that's great, because it's kind of fun, actually. And if you are a musician, or you like writing, or you like talking to people, or whatever, you like researching, there's room for everybody in the movement, and we need you. Many of you are already making changes in your lives, which is great. And we don't want you to stop what you're doing. But the massive scale of change we need is from nonviolent direct action. Think about it and come join us. Don't think too long. Join us today. Like I said, everybody is welcome. Whatever your skills, your passions, your gifts. We have artists, we have poets, we have, I just love being in the room with folks from XR because they're creative and imaginative and have a good sense of humor and like to have fun together. We are together because we love this planet and we love living things. And however you're feeling, there's a place for you. So we're just going to talk about how to get involved. This coming Wednesday, there is an orientation call, so you can learn more and get involved. And next Saturday, or this Saturday, in 6 days, there's an art build. We're going to do lots of fun. I love art builds. It's a great way to meet folks. Very, you join in and you can make banners, you can make drums, masks. There's going to be lots of fun stuff to do. And
I can confirm, it's really fun.
it is really fun. And a fun way to meet people, low pressure. And raise your hand if you're already part of XR. So just look around, and you can talk to any of these folks who have got their hands raised afterwards. Find out what it's like. Find out what it's like and get involved. We have a table over there with some flyers if you didn't get one already. There's a sign-up sheet, and I hope that you will come join us. Let's see here. Yeah, we have a lot going on in the next 2 weeks. Don't let this be you. Don't have this regret. If you're interested in joining, the next immediate step is to sign up for an intro and orientation call. And you can sign up online. Our website is xrdc.org. And we have a QR code right here, so you can just scan this if you want. There's also a QR code on our flyers. And I encourage you to just pull out your phone right now and sign up. Get on the email list, find out what we're doing, and the newsletter is really great. I love reading the newsletter because there's always lots of fun stuff going on. And if you want to learn more about some of the science stuff, we have an XR scientist, which is so cool. And they have a great document that we can share with you as well. Oops. That was about it. So, you can sign up for an intro call, you can sign up for the newsletter, and you can fill out a rebel card. If you're ready to sign up, let's do it. Let's be part of the movement together. I look forward to seeing you on the streets, and I will also take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol.
What is XR's position regarding nuclear fuel as a replacement for fossil fuel?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
It's never been mentioned yet.
That's true. Yeah. There was a picture of nuclear on one of the slides. Does anybody know the answer to that question?
Well, yeah, they don't have an official position because it's the people get to decide. There's going to be, the vision is that there's going to be citizens' assemblies throughout the whole world so the people will be deciding their own future.
Experts will educate the community, and the community will decide how to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, many of us have personal positions, personal opinions, but we don't have it's not part of our official policy. Yeah. I mean, I know how I feel about it.
It's pretty hard to replace fossil fuels with solar energy entirely. Nuclear makes it a whole lot more thinkable.
Yeah, it's tough. And I think we need to be having those conversations, absolutely. Because it's important to talk about all of the risks and benefits and really think it through. And everyone needs to have a seat at the table, especially people who are most affected, people who have to live near nuclear sites, and it's also a question of, well, what kind of lifestyle do we need to sustain? Do we have to be jet setting all over the planet? Do we have to be always having the latest electronics? Do we have to be using so much energy? So I think that's a real question too. A lot of the capitalism assumes that we're gonna keep buying more and more stuff, but at some point that doesn't work anymore, right? So I think for myself personally, and this isn't like XR's stance, but how do we live sustainably as a planet, and maybe use less as a planet? If everyone were to go vegan today, which isn't going to happen, but if everyone were to go vegan, we would only need 1/4 of the agricultural land that we need now, because most agricultural land is in pasture and growing feed for animals. So a lot of things we can do systemically to not need as much stuff. Yeah. Any other questions?
As if you need anything more to think about, earthquakes is something that I don't hear much about, except National Geographic some years ago talked about the changing of the shape of the earth with the melting of the solar caps. And the earth is going back to being more round than pear-shaped. And we will have more earthquakes in unusual places, like we did in Virginia. There's an old fault running under Manhattan. So whether it's the rising water or earthquakes, we're going to be bombarded and blindsided in different ways.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you turn that back.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. That's a whole nother tipping point, changing the shape of the earth.
And just to add, with the rising water, it's not quiet surface water. We're talking about the storms you mentioned, but the surge effect. We've seen it in the Atlantic and up the Chesapeake Bay, up to Baltimore. The surge effect is disastrous. In just a rainstorm, not even much of a hurricane, it does produce rain. So it's the visualizing. It's not just a quiet, pretty ocean that goes higher.
Right.
It's the stuff.
Yeah, and the storms become more and more disastrous. Right. Yeah.
What they've talked about is a planned retreat from the areas that will become underwater occasionally, where you come on over and say, we're going to devolve this urban area to higher ground. They've done it before in the past, but now they're doing it now. Staten Island is a good example, and parts of New Orleans are a good example, where they're going to start getting people to remove themselves certain places because it's no longer tenable. And that goes hand in glove to consumerism. We look about each other, and the people who make new innovations, they just want to get a little piece of your activity in order to get a temporary exchange, as opposed to having equipment that's repairable. And a good example of that is going to be the equipment used for large agriculture. It's intentionally made so that it's not repairable. So there's legislation afoot to be able to say you must allow people to have access to the technology to repair their own equipment, because you're just gonna idle it and force them to buy something else. I'm not saying this particularly, but in terms of a group think, we need to be able to press in that area to have repairability of small items, so that we're not constantly having to discard things that are perfectly good,
Yeah.
because they were not designed to be perfectly good. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?
Oh, yeah, planned obsolescence.
Land obsolescence is the one that's
Yeah.
causing a lot of waste.
Yeah,
Now,
Absolutely.
most of what I see with Extinction Rebellion has to do with the rising CO2, creating a sea level from carbon emissions. Somebody brought up nuclear power and nuclear waste. Well, it's a very complex thing, because if you were to implement solar energy, or maybe even tidal energy, which is indirect, you have to have a way of storing that for later use and distribution, but you can't get away from fossil fuels totally. How do you have a drawdown? More importantly, how do you enforce this drawdown so that somebody doesn't make a political change, said, well, I want to be able to make a temporary windfall to increase the use of fossil fuels, since it's available there and everybody's forgotten about how bad it was a generation ago. That's a tall order, to have a corporate memory that might expand, a different lifespan of different people. I'll stop there.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Great, well, thank you so much. I encourage you to pull out your phones, go to xrdc.org, throw your email address in there so we can keep in touch. Thank you so much. Do you want to say anything? This is Steph.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carol, for that presentation. Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Stephanie. I'm with XRDC as well. And I just wanted to sort of close this moment of presentation, thank the Galactic Panther for having us here. Like John said earlier, these events are going to be held every other Sunday until April 22nd, which is Earth Day, and there's going to be a big festival, so we hope to see you around again. And I did just want to say that this is a very big year for Extinction Rebellion. We have really a killer strategy to create a mass movement this year. And we really want you all to be a part of that. We've been working really hard. Extinction Rebellion had, a good amount of people before the pandemic. Then the pandemic hit. It was really hard. We struggled. But it also gave us some time to regroup and to really think about what we want to do and what would be the best strategy to do that, to be really effective. And we are so excited because we are so ready to take the streets this year and to have a mass movement in the streets of DC. We really want you to join us. There's, like Carol said, there's room for everybody, and we need so much help. We need so many skills. Like, everybody has something to contribute. So please feel free, if you have any questions, to approach us. We know how daunting taking the streets can be. This is not something personally speaking, this is not something that I've done a lot. That is something I've started to do very recently. It's very daunting. We're asking you to do something really, really hard. So feel free to talk to us. Carol spent a good amount of time in Minnesota on the front lines of the Line 3 fight. You can approach her, you can talk to her and ask her questions about what it was to be with indigenous groups and to follow their lead and to block construction sites over there. These are really intense experiences. We want to share them with you. So approach us. And we're really happy that you're here. We're happy to talk to you. We will meet you wherever you are, and we will welcome you. Thank you.
Hey, once again, I want to say thank you so much to Carol and Steph for giving such an enlightening and eye-opening presentation. It was very informative, and I feel like very rejuvenated and activated. Like, I feel like I want to take part in this movement of Extinction Rebellion. It's such a powerful and inspiring event and organization going on across the entire world. It's an international organization. I'm so grateful XRDC for coming out and giving this presentation, being involved in these sustainable gatherings, like she was saying, is every other week here at Galactic Panther, and for also being involved in the Sustainable Dream Festival, which is a multi-day festival on Earth Day, April 21st to 24th. It's going to be a whole amazing event with music and art and organizations and environmentalism and humanitarianism. And that's going to be occurring in Loudoun County in Middleburg, Virginia, which is just west of Dulles Airport, at a beautiful farm that's also a conservation of natural forest land and a regenerative garden as well. It's such a beautiful property that the Smithwick family has been generously invited us to host this event there. And I want to thank all you guys for coming out. I want to remind you guys that this is all a fundraiser to support XRDC and also to support the fundraiser and also to support this incredible art gallery. And if you want to support us, follow us, XRDC, follow Sustainable Dream Festival, follow Galactic Panther Art Gallery, and if you have anything that you would like to contribute, there is a donation jar by the front door, and we really appreciate that. We take cash out, Venmo. And there's also tons of food, so if you're hungry, please have some hummus, have some falafel. But I want to just open up the floor to see if anyone has anything to say, anyone has any questions, anyone has any statements that they want to make about environmentalism and about this presentation. One thing that I really felt like I was thinking about was when you were talking about how the United States has so much subsidies in oil, right? Like trillions of dollars that we're investing in oil companies to support them and their drilling. And people may ask, like, why are we giving all this money to them? If this is true capitalism, then they should be profiting plenty off of the demand, and it should just be like an economy that works on itself, as the capitalists say it should, right? Which I think we should take actions, but we're doing them in the wrong direction, obviously. And one thing that has led us, I believe, down this path of pumping all of our money down into oil is international competition. I mean, we're in this global competitive economy where we have to be better than China, we have to be better than other countries, and there's always been wars going on, and we feel like we need to have a stronger military, and that really has always led us down this path of where we have to invest all of our tax money into the military, into warplanes and boats, and therefore feel like we have this addiction to obtain as much oil and use as much oil as we can. And I feel like in one aspect is this fear that, and it's not even like US is really in danger, but I feel like we have this fear of not being the number one, this fear of not being in control of the world. This is my personal perspective. I'm not speaking for anyone, but I feel like one of the main things that we need to do is to just let go of that fear and just to not have control over the world. And that starts with not feeling like you give up control over, a lot of people feel like they have to have control over every aspect of their lives. And I feel like when you just allow things to happen, one perspective I feel like is like life is kind of going down a river, and if you try and fight the river, you try and control the way that you're going down the river, you're going to struggle, you're going to drown. But if you just go with the flow and understand how time and how energy flows, then you can guide yourself down the river. And once you feel like you give away that control, that obsession with control, then you can achieve where you need to go. And I feel like not only is that a personal idea, but also like a societal issue. Like, we don't have to control everything with our military. We don't have to be in charge of the world's oil. I feel like that has been guiding us to dump all of our tax money in the wrong things, is that sense of control. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I just wanted to add that to that specific point about how we're spending our money. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to say and to contribute onto this discussion? I want to open up the doors now to what is a open mic, and I want it to be more than just a traditional open mic where of course you bring your guitar, but even if you just want to say something, you just want to talk for 30 seconds about what we've been talking about all night, all day, or if you want to share a poem, of course, or if you just want to start a conversation about something, like propose a question to the audience, you can sign up to do anything that you want to do and just start and have a conversation. It doesn't have to be a poem or a song. And also it could be an artwork, show and tell. So if you have a painting and you want to have a conversation, just like what do you guys think about the background, and have like a show and tell about your art. It could be anything that you want to talk about when you sign up to this open mic. So I'm going to start a piece of paper. If anyone has anything to say, or real quick, does anyone have anything to say right now from their seat about these topics?
What I love about XR is that they're getting the knowledge out there, they're getting the sense of urgency, but they're also promoting community, and that we need to really collaborate and not blame, but like embrace each other gently while also fighting this huge, very oppressive, crushing issue that we're facing.
Yeah, I agree with that, And I think the one thing that comes, with activism, like having people passionate enough to get out in the streets together and to block traffic, or just to create awareness and to get people to just open their eyes about what's going on. I mean, you kind of have to be with people you trust, be with people who support you, that have your back, that we're all working here together. So that is one thing I really agree with Kiki for saying, Extinction Rebellion is about protest and activism, but it's also about community. It's a community of people who are like-minded, and we can support each other in so many ways, like you're saying, even just the idea that you have a community at home that supports what you're doing can be so empowering when you're out there, even if they're not with you. Just to know that they support you, they'll answer the phone if you need them. And just being, or even just having your own, if you're doing your own business or your own events or music, just knowing that you are in supportive of what XR is doing can mean a lot, and to empower the movement. So I agree with that. I thank you guys for having such a strong and empowering community. Okay, so I'm going to start up a list. I'm going to play a song. We're going to have casual conversation for 5 minutes so we can have discussions about what we learned, kind of regurgitate all this information. And if you want to say anything or sign up to say anything, feel free to come up to the front. By the way, I just want to say that my co-founder of Lucid District is my music and art collective, and I co-founded it with my friend Bert, who goes by Blaudis. He's an incredible producer. He produced this music.